My name is Bill Swainson. I have the great good fortune to be Senior Commissioning Editor at Bloomsbury. And within my sort of bailiwick comes, I do mostly non-fiction, but I also do a small, what would be called, if we were in the fashion business, boutique list of fiction and translation. And you're going to hear very little from me this afternoon, except I just say that to reassure you I've got some experience in this, but I'm looking forward to hearing what the panel has to say. And the way we're going to do this is that each of the panel members, who I'll introduce in a second, will speak for 5 minutes about their approach to taking on translated literature and, most importantly, publishing it. And then we'll have a sort of discussion amongst ourselves for maybe a quarter of an hour, and then we'll open it up to questions from the floor, because we are billed as what do publishers want? And I think all of us will be quite interested to find out what publishers want, because we don't really think of ourselves in terms of a category like that. So without further ado, straight on to introduction. So on my far right is Jane Lawson, and Jane is editorial director of the Doubleday imprint at Transworld. And this afternoon we'll be playing the role of the commercial publisher of books like Monica Ralli's Brick Lane, Vikas Swarup's Slumdog Millionaire, and also books in translation taken on commercially successful books taken on to be published commercially successfully in Britain. So that would include books like Ildefonso's Falcone's The Cathedral of the Sea, but also and books like Paolo Giordano's The Solitude of Prime Numbers. And then next to Jane, to my right, is Chad Post. And I'm going to have to speak almost as fast as Chad to fit his biography. Your reputation precedes you. Into a very short space. People in Britain will know him, first of all, as the progenitor of the website 3%. But you may not know that he's behind the US equivalent of the Independent Foreign Fiction Prize, the Best Translated Book award. He's a journalist on Rolling Stone, and he, in his spare time at Rochester, runs an imprint called Open Letter, and where he's the publisher of Arnon Grunberg. Marguerite Duras I was fascinated to see, because she was one of the first writers I worked on with John Calder many, many years ago, and has some connection with Mikhail Shishkin and also Jan Karstedt. So very wide-ranging. And then on my immediate right is Laura Barber, who is the editorial director at Portobello and Granta, and has been buying in a whole range of new writing. But before she went to Portobello and Granta, she ran the Penguin Classics list, and also produced and edited a rather wonderful anthology called
Poems for Love. Poems for Life.
Poems for Life. I think the sequel, Poems for Love, will follow. And in her work as an editor at Portobello and Granta, she's published a very wide range of the best of new writing. Peter Stamm, whose book Seven was very successful a year or so ago, but really interesting writers like Valeria Luiselli, Agnes Desart, David Trueba, the Italian Fabio Stassi, and Nicholas Dickner. So we've got a wide range of people. So we'll just go through the roles again. I am the moderator, not the Jeremy Paxman figure. Jane is commercial publisher. Chad is, let's say, the person that puts the spice and the ginger into any debate. And Laura is the literary publisher. So away we go. And I think the idea is that each speaks for 5 minutes. So let's start where all of us would like to be: commercially successful publishers reaching the widest possible audience. So Jane, do start.
Can you hear me? Yes, okay. So I work on the Doubleday list, which is the slightly more upmarket list in a very commercially driven environment. Transworld is part of Random House, and it When I pick up a book, I have to immediately, first of all, I say, is there a voice? Is there a story? Are there good characters? And most importantly, is there a pitch? If I were to describe this book in 1 minute, will I have persuaded that person who's listening to read this book? So there always has to be something a bit quirky and a little bit different. So I'm trying to build a more internationally facing list at Doubleday. And we are also looking for rights income. So that's another thing that drives my choice of acquisition. So I will look at authors that are not published in their own language, but not published, for example, anywhere else in the world, and particularly not in America. I'll be looking for authors who perhaps speak English. So you might ask why that is, but if you look at the market now, we're all very, very publicity driven. So Waterstones are a reactive bookseller. They look for books that are selling elsewhere. So we are very, very publicity focused. We're very social media focused. So if we can bring an author over to the UK and they can enchant an audience speaking in English and blog and write pieces for The Guardian and The Times and wherever, we've got ourselves a platform. So I think the most important thing to say is that we're looking for books that we love, but we think that we can sell, that have what we call a platform. So we can go on forever about what a platform is, but I think I've spoken for enough time. Bill, do you think?
You can have another 45 seconds
okay,
if you want.
So anyway, let me just, for example, give you I bought a book called The Fat Years, a Chinese author, bought world rights to this book, which is a sort of dystopian Chinese book with an unusual pitch. It created a lot of waves. It was banned in China, which is always, our publicity team love books that are banned in their original language. And the author was very sophisticated, and he spoke very good English. So we were able to bring him over to Edinburgh Festival. We were able to organise some bookshop events. He was able to blog for us. And because the book had such an interesting pitch, we were able to sell that in 15 languages. So that our focus is really on rights income, that is buying a book that we love and being able to sell it elsewhere.
Okay, thank you very much. Laura, would you like to go next?
Sure. I used to be a cox, so I'm worried about being too loud. So do tell me if that's a problem as well. So as Bill said, my first job in publishing was working as the editorial director of the Penguin Classics list, which is a huge privilege, largely because it's one of the few lists that's commercially successful. When it was started, it was purely devoted to literature and translation. The very first book in 1946 was Homer's The Odyssey, and it kind of went on from there, and only in the 70s, I think, started it taking in English language writers. So that was really my background in translation, which was, to be publishing Chekhov and Tolstoy and Flaubert was a great privilege. But the problem, of course, with that is that they are all dead. So when I was offered the chance to start a completely new list, one of the joys of that was not only working with living translators, but also living authors, which for me was a wonderful thing. But I think still in the back of my head, I was trying to be looking for the kind of writing that might still be read in 5 or 6 or 7 years' time, not just by the time the paperback came around, which is how fast the turnover now is. So I think we already have a few of those authors on our list with Peter Stamm, with Herta Müller, with Jenny Erpenbeck, and with Valeria Luiselli. And what else? I mean, I think, as Jane was saying, when the first thing that I do when I am considering a work in translation, which already today, even though the book fair's only just started, I've already heard probably 30 or 40 books in translation described. Of those, one's always sort of almost filtering out in one's mind the things one wants to get a report on. And a very great publisher here once said to me, you publish things 4 times, not once. The first time you publish it to yourself. So if I can't immediately think of how I'm going to tell that story to myself, then that it's fallen at the first post. The second time is you publish it to your colleagues. The third is you publish it to the sales team, and only then do you publish it to the outside world. And at each time, the story has got to be really strong. And that's, I mean, I think it's, I'm lucky that I've ended up in a job where I can be quite idealistic in that way. But, occasionally we do have books that are exciting, that first inkling of a great story, and that actually turns out to be true in sales terms as well. But we're also lucky in that we're not, the list is, there are some books that we publish which are never going to be bestsellers, but we're able to publish them. Our owner funds us to do that because they are great literature which needs to be published. And that's, I think, quite a unique position, especially for British publishers, where Portobello was set up specifically with the idea of doing a third of the list in translation. Is that literary enough for you, Bill?
That's literary enough. Now, Chad, can you come in and be a one-man ginger group and set some sparks flying?
I feel like I'm supposed to wind myself up and throw sparks fastly and quickly at all of you. We are Open Letters is somewhat different than both of you. Well, we're mostly different from you, but we're closer to you, but different too, because we're a nonprofit, which is something that doesn't quite exist in the UK in the same way that it does in the US. So certain presses, a number of presses in the United States are set up as 501c3s, or educational presses in a sense, and you can, as a result, you can get funding for books that you're publishing from individuals, from organizations, from the government, and from other governments, and you don't have to pay taxes. So you get to operate in a different way than a commercial press does, where you're much more influenced by market forces than we would be, and you are to some degree as well, though you have also a different kind of setup. But we have a mission statement of trying to find these great books from all over the world that are something that is unlike anything that American or English readers would otherwise have access to. So our educational mission is to allow people to have access to things that they never would have access to if left up to market forces, probably wouldn't have access to, and then to try and promote those as widely and as farly as possible. So this leads to all the sparks and fire of that. We are generally looking for books that are unlike American writers in a lot of ways. Like, one of the things that always has stuck with me, and the first time that I went to Germany on an editor's trip, we were at some meeting, and the one guy was like, oh, German literature used to be very experimental and crazy and interesting, and then we just started writing like you Americans, so now you should publish our books. It's like, why the fuck would we want to publish a book that's just like an American book? Like, that's not interesting. So we tend to look for those things that are opposite of that are something that's structurally strange, unique, that our whole purpose is to allow American readers and American writers to see new ways of expressing themselves through this medium. And since we are a nonprofit, we're sort of protected in that we want all of our books to sell, to be bestsellers, and to be up there as well. But we also know that competing on that level with other publishers that do that sort of thing so much better than we ever will is basically impossible. So we take our 3-person staff, find the books that we think are the most interesting and that will appeal to an audience as large as we can make it, and then do everything we can to promote those through our 3% stuff, through different things that we do online, through this Best Translated Book Award. So our main goal is to do that. So we're sort of like the outlier in some ways, I would say, because we're not as bound by market pressures. That explains.
That's great. Thank you all very much, because we've now established difference. The next stage, if we're going to, I hadn't actually thought of this, but we're going to antithesis next. And the thing that strikes me from each of the presentations is this. We've talked about market forces, I think, is the key. We've talked about the non-profit route, the literary selection, the commercial selection. But what happens when whatever you do, none of us are giving the books away unless we're doing it and not telling anyone. We're selling them. So the next place to go, I think, is how do we publish those books in the widest sense? How do we bring them to the public's attention? How do we win readers for those authors and their books? And what are the techniques we use? So this time I'm going to start with Laura. Laura, how, as a literary publisher based in London, does Portobello and Granta go about trying to get the attention for the books it's taken on with such passion?
Well, I think in some ways they are the book trade, because we publish a lot of books, it's not that difficult to get published, I don't think, now, because there are just so many outlets. It's actually just trying to get them to your readers. So it's partly building up a kind of a knowledge of who your readers are. And so, for example, there's a book that we're publishing this August, which I think, although it's not by one living author, it's by many. It sort of stands. The reason why I acquired it was because it sort of stands for exactly what I think we stand for. And it's a book that was originally commissioned by McSweeney's in America, and it's called Multiples. And it takes the form of a kind of literary relay race. So one person translates an unknown story from a foreign language into English. Another person then translates it into their own language from English. Then an English person translates that version back. So it's like this game of Chinese whispers. And at each point, the story changes, sometimes in unexpected ways and sometimes in deliberate ways. The twist is that not all of the writers are 100% fluent in the language they're translating from, and they were also encouraged to take great liberties. So the whole thing is great fun, but also asks and answers some serious questions about what translation does, what's the difference between a translation and a version, and it's also just showing that it can be entertaining. And there, when I presented this slightly insane sounding book to my marketing department, I reassured them that I wasn't expecting this to be a bestseller, but that there was a very clear target readership, who are the kind of people who go to literary festivals, who come to events like this, who are sort of literary hipsters, who like the idea of thinking when they read, and who can get excited about that. And if we try to package the book that would make it a book that they wanted to pick up to own, whether or not they read it, then in a way I don't really mind, as long as they use it as a kind of coffee table accessory and occasionally dip into it, then that was the way that we thought about it. And having such a clear aim, we got a very trendy cover design for it. We've got a launch event that's going to be taking place in Edinburgh, and I'm going to have a coughing fit now, so sorry, we keep reinfecting each other with the joy of translation, and so it will get literary reviews, which will get those readers buying it. It will get all the kind of the blog coverage that we know how to get. And it's kind of perfect example of knowing where the audience for this book is and finding different ways of reaching them. So, sorry.
No, Jane, could you talked, you used the phrase platform, creating the platform. Could you just talk about how you get that audience for your books and where the platform fits in?
Creating a platform. Unfortunately, you're not going to like this, but generally we have to acquire a book that has already got its platform. And that could be a very unusual pitch, or a sort of a bestseller in its own country, or a ban in its own country, several prizes, or controversial sort of prize winner. But I recently acquired a Brazilian novel, and don't think me crass about this, but Brazil, to a commercially minded company, was very attractive, because Brazil is a country that everyone is sort of moving into, publishers are moving into. They think there's a sort of very big untapped market there, and it's an interesting, vibrant place. So I was able to acquire this Brazilian novel because A, the author spoke English, B, the story, which is it's a sort of Stand By Me meets I'm Not Scared by Nicola Minetti. So I could pitch this book that had a 2-line pitch. The platform being that it's won several prizes in Brazil, the platform being that he speaks English, and that there is a strong autobiographical element to this book, which gives the author his publicity platform, so that he can go on radios and World Service and these other places that speak to the literary hipsters, as Laura said, and he has his spiel, so to speak. The other thing, reaching readers, is packaging. Packaging is really, really vital. You have to appeal to a sort of literary grant or reading audience. You have to make your hardback look very, very gorgeous. No expenses spared in this era of sort of ebook reading. And what else, Bill, that I can say that's sort of platform?
Okay. That gives us a sense of the platform. We'll just go to Chad for a minute, then we'll come back round, because there's the platform in terms of how you create the idea for the book when you're talking with colleagues and you're talking with your sales team, and then the sales team have to talk with the bookshops and Amazon and so on. So at each stage, the original excitement about the book gets repackaged and tied up in a different way to go to the next stage. And the trick is going to be, it's a bit like a conjuring trick. At the end of this process, how do you make sure that the book you acquired with editorial passion pops out of the packaging untransformed for the reader to read? Because what we don't want to happen is, you remember the film The Fly, we don't want that. Bad translation, bad marketing, bad publicity can do that. So how does the non-profit publisher do this work, Chad?
One of the things that that we specifically set out to do when we were forming Open Letter, because I'd worked at Delkey Archive for years beforehand, and then left and to set up and start Open Letter at the University of Rochester. And one of the things we decided right at the start was that we were going to make our publishing house a sort of brand, that all of the covers would have a similarity, so they'd be recognizable without looking the same. I have a thing that I can show you guys later, but they're all bright colors, all this kind of mod design. There's no photographs. It looks similar. And I think that for a press of our size and our stature, maybe not even the nonprofit aspect of it, but I think that that's important to a press of our nature, that we have a very specific niche of literature and translation and like high literature. We have a certain, all the literary hipsters, all the blogs, they love our books. And because we sort of brand ourselves and made ourselves this thing, we get a lot of reviews in the New York Times and LA Times and these places because we're considered to be one of the few sources of really high quality literature, and we're recognizable as such, and people know that if they've read one book, they know what other books kind of fit into that series because they look the same and they're going to be of equal sort of quality. So part of our overall getting the books out there is that we're taking the authors that don't have the platform, that are completely unknown to English or American, and even within their own country may not be all that well known, and trying to make them find an audience. And we're helping them find an audience first through the book itself, and through the normal sorts of promotions, but also backing it up by, it's an open letter book, which means something more. So you may not have ever heard of Kristen Omer's daughter from Iceland, and she may not have any sort of thing that will help. She doesn't speak English, she's not going to be in the US, she's got nothing. But because we're publishing and you've read Marguerite Duras or the Scherstad or Grunberg, at least gives people some inkling of that this could be a book that they'd be interested in. So we try and use that to help boost people over the edge. We also have, in relation to that, is we started from the beginning with a subscription series, so people could subscribe for half a year or for a year. So for $100, you get 10 books sent to you, one a month, basically, with like a letter. Sometimes it's like information from the author or like a special thing that's included in it, but it's so that there's kind of that loyalty, that you can get all the open letter books and you will see this world of literature and translation via the press. At the same time, we still have the same goals that you guys do of like promoting that specific book, and how that specific book finds its audience can differ in each case. Like right now we have the Mikhail Shishkin's Maidenhair, which is an absolute masterpiece and is probably the best book I've ever been involved in publishing. And that was doing well. It's super dense. It's like 500 pages, and it is not easy for your normal average reader to read. They're going to get lost in it. They're not going to know what's going on. They will not relate to any characters per se. But it's beautiful. And if you read, anyone who's read it that I've talked to has read like 50 pages and can guarantee, they'll always say that it's an absolute masterpiece and they're not quite sure what's going on, but they're willing to go with it. But then recently he sent out a letter, Shishkin did, to basically a public letter when he was asked to be part of Read Russia and the BEA in America this summer, where he rejected that because he doesn't want to support the government. He doesn't want to be someone who's being used as propaganda for the Russian government, so on and so forth. And suddenly there's a whole new wave of attention that's being paid to this book and to him as an author, and we take advantage of that. I mean, the classic story of this sort of like velocity marketing sort of aspect, which I cannot tell because it would take like an hour. I have a whole speech about it that I'm giving to my class on Monday. But it's about when we had a book on Lost when I was at Delkey, and we had a book on Lost, which no one had really sold books because they were on a TV show, and we suddenly sold 15,000 copies in 2 weeks because we took advantage of that situation. So I think for a small company like us, we both have to have a vision that's very well stated and well well kind of placed and foregrounded, but also be nimble enough that when something starts to hit, we can do something about it that we usually can't do because we usually don't have the money to throw at certain of these books.
Okay. So everybody needs some kind of platform, and in Chad's case, it sounds like Open Letter is its own platform, a bit like And Other Stories here, where the quality of editorial selection is one of its great strengths. And in fact, the work that the And Other Stories crew do alongside in terms of reading groups and finding books is really fabulous. So what I do want to come back to this question of selling and marketing, but there are other things that we need to look at first. And I think probably what will interest the audience here, perhaps more than anything, is how we all find our books. And I will chip in at the end with how we do it at Bloomsbury if it offers something that's not come from one of the other panelists. So Jane, would you start with how you go about finding your books?
Yeah, I rely on translators to come to me and say, I love this book because, and if they can tell me how much they love it in an elevator pitch, then it sounds different and unusual, and possibly it's already sold a lot of copies. I would take it on. Obviously, I can't read the language, so I have to believe in their passion, and that's really how it is. How I found my books. A lot of the time, I meet other editors here from different foreign publishers, and they tell me you must go after this book. But if they're telling me I must go after this book, it's very likely that Bill is also going after it, and several other publishers, and that makes it expensive, and so we occasionally becomes less attractive. But I think that the idea is to find something original that other people aren't looking at through a translator and make it happen is a publisher's dream.
Okay. And then Chad.
We use a lot of translator contacts as well, but in addition, like meeting with the different cultural agencies from the different parts of the world, different countries, and with different publishers at places like the London Book Fair or Frankfurt does inform us a bit. But a lot of it is like research and reading and recommendations, even if it's not the translator bringing in a sample, although a lot of translators do bring us samples, but it may just be that they recommend 2 or 3 books that they just heard about that they think are interesting. And we're also, this is another difference, I suppose, is that we're not always looking for the book that came out a year or 2 ago or is coming out in a year. We're looking at things from the 20th century. So we're doing this Marguerite Duras book, which has never been published in English, that came out in the 60s, but that's kind of perfectly fits our sort of aesthetic. And that came about through a random situation where the translator walked by our booth at AWP, and I didn't know him, I knew his name, and he didn't know me, and he saw that we had reprinted one of our earlier books, A Sailor from Gibraltar. He's like, well, I've got this manuscript that I've never given to anyone if you want to publish it, of this book of hers. So it kind of worked by happenstance in that case. But a lot of times it's like sort of getting recommendations, reading about it, finding something that sounds sort of interesting, and we have like a huge network of translators, both from people I've worked with, people we meet at places like this, and also through the university has a translation program, so we can start asking them for recommendations or to do reading samples or do our sort of research that way. So we're very heavily invested in that kind of person-person contact.
Right. Laura.
And I think it's kind of the same for us, only I probably put slightly more emphasis on meetings at book fairs, and really over the years filtering down the people I meet to being people I would also count as friends. And if they're reading something and buying it and getting excited about it, then their recommendation counts probably for more than seeing it in an agent's rights guide. And they're quite often the hunches that I would then follow up. But obviously we also get translators writing in with suggestions which we can follow up. But yeah, it's actually just talking to people as friends and finding out what they're hearing that's exciting. And I think one of the nice things about being at the book fair, and also one of the maddening things, is that it's almost a novel gets created and it's sort of a mishmash of a mashup of things that people have half heard. So you end up with, oh, is that the guy who has Alzheimer's who walks across the Alps? And you're like, no, this is the Alzheimer's one who where she's
Climb through a window?
Exactly, or and it's like you get a sort of a sense in which there are lots of different books that are sort of slightly happening or not, and then you sort of gradually later filter out the ones that sound plausible. But it is really that initial spark of excitement that it's generated in someone else, I think.
One other thing that I can't believe I didn't mention, or that none of us mentioned, was also like the literary journals that are doing stuff in translation, like Granta, for instance, with the best Spanish language novelists or things that fall into that vein. We look at a lot, and a lot of different anthologies that come out. We usually look through to try and find authors that would fit our list and that would be of interest to us. So that's another source of stuff.
So I think it's fairly clear that we all have networks of one kind or another, and I just chuck in a couple of things that we haven't mentioned, just to sort of give you an idea of the spread. One of them is on a good weekend day, when you're not trying to catch up with all the reading you didn't do during the week, I'll try and look at the El País and Le Monde just to see what's coming up there, to get a sense of what other countries are finding interesting. And that's extremely helpful. You don't necessarily make your decision based on one piece of information you get. You put it all together into, a mashup, as you were saying, but it's a creative mashup. The other thing is this London Book Fair, the market focus country is Turkey. And the British Council with the London Book Fair took, I think, about 7 or 8 publishers, agents, literary journalists to Istanbul in November. And it was a kind of crash course in meeting Turkish publishers, Turkish agents, Turkish writers and journalists. And it was masterminded with military precision, but that was the only thing that was military about it. It was a really creative use of sort of government money, British Council money. And as a result of that, various of us met, came away with a picture of what's happening in Turkey it was very exciting what's going on there. It's a country in huge change. I didn't know that the population of Istanbul was only about the same as Cairo and only slightly smaller than Mexico City. 17.5 million people crammed into sort of 3 areas. And a country in which the big transition is a bit like England in the 19th century, beginning of the 19th century, Industrial Revolution, with people moving from the village into the city. So one of the big sort of themes is that movement from a small village into the anonymous city. And I'm very glad to say I picked up, much to my surprise, ended up buying a book as a result of that visit. I wasn't expecting to. I went with an idea in my head of I want to find a writer who I could work with over a number of years and a number of books. But I thought the chances of coming back from such a shopping trip with something in my bag were very small, but it did happen. So that's another way. And the other thing I would mention is the initiatives of new books in German, or new Spanish books, or the Dutch Literary Foundation, or the Danish, or the Finnish. Each country seems to have decided to spend money in one way or another in providing a kind of literary guide to what's going on in their country. And that's also, again, it's background information and really useful.
And I think, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Laura.
The thing about visiting a different the country and actually seeing the writers in their place is really, all the times I've done it, it's been immensely helpful, because it's so difficult to know whether you're hearing about something that's original or derivative or part of a wave, or whether you're actually picking up the best of that author's work. And sometimes it doesn't necessarily, that kind of shopping trip or sort of apparent junket doesn't necessarily yield a writer straight away. But if you then hear about that writer again, and that's the book that you should be going for, it really pays off kind of long term.
Yeah, you can't overemphasize the importance of things like Norla or Philly or the Estonian Literature Center or any of those, because they are very useful for creating those guides and being a source of information if you have any questions, or providing samples. But also those trips are amazing. I mean, it changes everything to be able to see, just to meet with the publishers in their space, to see like what the landscape, the literary landscape is, and have a much better context of like, this author X isn't just author X in a void from Bulgaria, but now it's like author X in this. I kind of understand the Bulgarian literary scene a bit, because I know of like 10 different authors, and I've been there, and I sort of have an idea. And that kind of context building is really important for me, at least, in terms of helping decide whether or not a book would fit our list or not.
Now, I said I wanted to come back to this question of how the publisher, having taken on the book by whatever means and done two of the four publications, the reps then have to, that is the sales representatives, then have to take what we've packaged up, which contains this priceless gem inside, to the bookshops, to Amazon, to publish online, and so on, and for that matter, to the literary editors as well. So how does that work at Transworld, Jane?
Well, it's you mean selling to your own sales department?
Well,
and
then what materials do they need, and
Yes.
how do they sell?
Well,
your treasure?
they need this sort of elusive platform. So what we do is we produce book proofs, and again, book proof copy is very, very crucial. All editors are going to copywriting courses to get that blurb right, and then we send out those book proofs to sort of key influencers in the market, or other authors, buyers, journalists, bloggers. And our dream for an editor is to get a nice juicy quote from another author, a recommendation from another author, and then our sales team can go to Waterstones and say, look, David Mitchell recommend this book, and instantly that'll be a sort of shoe in for Waterstones. If you've got David Mitchell's recommendation on the front of or any other author, I'm just giving an example because I've got one in my head. That opens doors.
Okay. No, that's it. That's great, because what's emerging is that it's a process of several stages. It involves a huge number of people, and we're all trying to do sort of the same thing, but with very different content in our packages, but having to use similar means. But Chad, for you working with Open Letter and in the US, which is a different market setup, less concentrated, less focused than the UK, how do you do it?
A lot of it is similar in terms of sending out the copies ahead of time to different influencers, be that readers that we know, bloggers, different buyers. We have the disadvantage of that we do our own representation. So I meet with Barnes & Noble and sell to them directly and deal with a lot of the bookstores, the bigger bookstores. So we don't have the potential communication issue of like, you have all these books and you really want your sales rep to promote your book, but they also have a diverse interest and have to do something else. Like, I get to talk to each bookseller about which books and what's happening to them and know that information and pass it on directly. And we do a lot more, I think, with direct to customers than other people do, because we work a lot more with trying to have that interface, that feedback loop be part of our business. So it's not just like going to our sales rep, going to the bookstore, going to a customer, but more that is part of it, but also going directly to the customer through these subscriptions. Plus, I just want to plug that tomorrow morning we're doing the Marketer's Toolkit panel here at 10 a.m., which will be about how translators can help promote their books and find buyers and readers after and during the publication process, which I think ties into what you're asking about now.
And Laura, for Portobello and Granta, how's it done?
Well, I can be sort of in between the two, conveniently according to your model, Bill. But I think it's relying on individuals, and we present our books once every 6 months to the sales team, and we're part of the Faber-led Independent Sales Alliance, which is an alliance of sales reps who represent all of the books in, say, Quercus and Atlantic and Canongate. And after that, the reps have monthly meetings when they're selling in a specific month's books, and each of them have to champion one of the books that they're talking about. And quite often, we will know that they're fighting over which books that they get to talk about, and you know that all of those reps have read, the book proof, and that they're going out and each of them being passionate about the books when they're talking to the book buyers. And it can't happen, all the time, but quite often, that they know their bookshops really well. So there are some books which are maybe like a slightly more experimental Dutch novel is not really going to sell in a small town where it's only got a small independent bookshop, but it might sell in a different country, and they will pick their kind of battles to fight in a way. But when they do recommend a book, the booksellers take them seriously, because that personal recommendation really counts. So I think it's always that sort of infectious excitement each time carrying it through. And obviously, if David Mitchell was to recommend one of our books, that would be a huge help as well. And we need to find this guy's address.
Jane will pass you his email address afterwards. Okay, now is the moment to open up the discussion to the floor. I'm sorry we ran on a couple of minutes longer than we should have done, but I think we're okay. 5, 10, 10? We can have maybe 7 minutes. That was a negotiation. Who would like to go first?
Hi there. I was just wondering if you could talk a bit more about what you're looking for from translators who bring books to you. Are you looking for things like, sales figures, complete knowledge of the rights and everything, or is it a case of having a passion about the book and be able to sell it to you, as it were?
Okay, to make this go a little bit faster, to fit in the questions, I'm going to ask one panelist to answer each question. So Jane, would you go with that one?
I would consider first and foremost what the story is and what the location is and what the pitch is. 2-line pitch.
That's the answer.
I'm intrigued that Jane in particular is insisting about pitch and about things being quirky, because in my experience, often the editors can get excited about a book that a translator is trying to sell to them, so to speak, but then they'll say, oh no, the publishing department doesn't, the marketing department doesn't like it, they're scared because it's not like anything else. They want comparables.
Well, the pitch, if you're practiced at the art of pitching, you can make that book sound like something that they want to hear.
Okay.
It's all the art of spin.
So,
Sorry, I'm being a real devil's advocate here. But
so this is exactly what we need to get the range. So Laura, being the angel in the team, can you, for the moment, can you just comment on that? About the difficulty of the editor might be interested in the quirky, the interesting, the challenging, but what do you do about the marketing department?
Well, I
to
think
be brutal.
In a way, we're very editorially led at Granta and Portobello, and our sales director, actually, I wanted to kind of have this put on a T-shirt and then go around to the other publishers. But she said that if you think a book is good enough, then it's up to me to sell it. So in a way, you have to internalise. You have an inner marketing person, and it's that thing. If I can't imagine wanting to get excited about it and make my friends read it, then you can have the best book in the world, but if you can't find a way of talking about it, then no matter how quirky it is, that's not good enough. I mean, there are so many books published in the world every year, and all of them have good reasons to be published, to be translated, and I can only pick, say, 10. It's nothing personal against the book. It's what sort of excites me personally, in a way, and that I want to have a fight with my marketing person about, and feel that actually, if once they read it, then they will like it.
Right.
Well, of course,
Now,
marketing is
Chad,
not something that we do anymore.
No. Well, we'll maybe
That's
come on to that in a second. But Chad, you are your marketing department, your sales department, your publicity department. So, how do you beat yourself up?
Yeah, that's a good point. No, I'm for going back to your original, the first question too. Like when we get the books or get the submissions from translators, what we like is not so much the pitch so much as the references of where this book kind of fits in. I also really like if a translator sends us a cover letter that has a reference to one of our books or our press in general. I very much appreciate that, because I'm sick of getting all these ones that have nothing to do with anything we've ever done, and it's clear this person has never looked at our website before. But in terms of creating, we do have, I mean, there is a sense when we have our meetings internally of, well, this book would be really good, but it probably is not going to sell. So let's put it in a season in which, if we're going to do it, let's put this in a season in which we have something else to sort of balance it out. So we don't beat ourselves up in that sort of way of like convincing yourself to be excited about it. It's more of what's the best opportune moment to do this, and what can we do for it? Should we wait a year because there might be something that would make this work a little bit better so we can actually reach a large audience? Or do we like do things like give away extra copies to try and generate reader excitement, whatever it might be?
Okay. Another question. No? One over there. Can we have a microphone going that way? Yeah. Well, while you're getting there, I'll just say at Bloomsbury what we do is we actually, the editor creates a kind of, what would you call it, a proposal, literally a proposal. Sheet 1 will say to all our colleagues in sales and marketing and editorial and rights, this is the book, and the rights are held by this person, and this is the reason I want to take it on. And then inside there'll be maybe a plot summary, there'll be a report. If it's a translated book, there might be a sample translation. But a really important point I want to make is that whether we're taking on a book written in English or in translation, the process of publishing it is the same, in this sense that you have to convince yourself, convince your team, the team has to convince the bookshops, and then the publicity team has to bring the book into the public and convince the public. Now, I'll be ready with the microphone.
Hi. This is perhaps a question less for Chad, because I think you've already touched on it a bit. But how important is it that an author that is brought to you by a translator or anyone else is new in English and hasn't been translated before? Because I'm interested in an author. One of his books was very successful and was translated, but it was by a very small press who haven't got the means to take on other books by him. But some people have suggested, well, that's a bit risky. That's that if a publisher doesn't continue with that author, is that a downside? So, I mean, is this a risk factor for you, or something you would?
I think it all depends
not
on the
consider?
strength of the story, of the book itself, really. If that book is good enough, then you can hide the bad track record somehow.
Okay. So, another question. Do we have any more? So, there was sort of a question, or it was just a... We're back here. So, there we are, at the back. No, it was a bit like conducting an auction. I thought there was a bid over there, but it was just somebody scratching their head. And I think... Emma Cleve, can you just hold up the number of fingers for the number of minutes we have left? 1, 2. I'll take 2. Go ahead.
I'll try to be quick. I feel like an odd specimen here. I'm an academic and a PhD student, and I also teach English literature in Germany, though. And I wonder, does criticism come in any of this? You spoke of newspaper articles, newspaper reviews that you may be reading. Journalistic, essayistic, academic criticism in any way, does it play a role?
So we start from the end, and 30 seconds each, coming down.
Reviews certainly count, because other people have said this book is good, so therefore it gets to the top of the pile. I think that the more academic the reviews, the less a commercial publisher would attention they'd pay. But if there was a good review in the Times, then that was certainly very important.
Yeah, I hate to say it, but I'm at a university and talk to a lot of academics about our books, and they're part of our kind of editorial and advisory board. And less about their criticism. Sometimes their opinions about people who have been overlooked tend to come up, and sometimes they'll use kind of more critical academic books to do some sort of discovery or things I'm interested in, hear about an author from there, but less so about the who's writing about whomever in whatever country, and then we try and translate it, fortunately.
And I think for me, the reviews, if it's been covered a lot, then that's almost more persuasive than what individual reviews have said, because especially in, just to pick France, quite often the reviews aren't so much reviews as descriptions of the book, and quite often you sense that the people know the people they're reviewing, and it's quite difficult, especially from the outside. I mean, it's difficult enough in English trying to work out who's married to who and who's got a grudge to bear, to try and work out what's kind of behind that review. But it's more the breadth of coverage and the seriousness with which the media is treating it than a specific review. Although obviously, if everyone was slating it, then that would be saying something.
Yeah. So it's a kind of process of triangulation that one review tells you only a very little, 2 reviews tell you slightly more, but 3 means you can almost plot your place, as it were, with a compass in the 3 dimensions of this very tricky world we operate in. All of us, I hasten to add, we've been sort of slightly playing roles this afternoon, but if you took any one of us aside, I think one of the things that we would all say is we're trying to publish as best we can the best books we can possibly find, given the kinds of lists that we do. So will you join me in thanking our panel, Jane Lawson, Chad Post, and Laura Barber.